you have to win all the different parts of the bet in order to win your bet. So the payoff, the odds get a lot higher. So people like to do that because the odds are higher. So if you just bet on two games instead of one, the payoff odds go up because the chance is, if the point spread is correct, and the chance is a half that you 50-50 that you win, it's a half times a half, or 1/4, or 3-1 that you'll win both bets and win a 2-game parlay.
Let's impact some today. I think we're going to do a great job.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Man Podcast, where we are here to connect men in pursuit of their potential. I encourage you to join us as we embrace discomfort, cultivate community, and put wind in each other's sails. Also, before we jump into the episode, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. And don't forget to check out the Noble Knights Mastermind Group. This is for the fellas. It's where you can find support, accountability, and mentorship that you need in order to achieve your goals. We're talking about a brotherhood. I encourage the fellas listening to join us for free and become a part of a community of like-minded men on a mission to improve themselves and elevate their capacity for life. And I'm excited because we are getting wind in our sails today from my guest. He is a distinguished professor, consultant, researcher, and author with a wealth of experience that offers unique insights. It's my pleasure to have Dr. Michael Orkin on the show today. Dr. Orkin, thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure, Ted. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. Now, before we jump into our conversation and some of your expertise, I do want to take first a moment to give you the mic, give you the podcast, let you speak to the folks at home and introduce yourself in your own words.
Okay, well, I am a statistics person. I went to UC Berkeley many years ago. I had a bachelor's in math and a PhD in statistics. And I got into the academic world to some extent, taught for many years at one of the California state universities in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And then retired to go into consulting. And I consulted the gaming industry. And then I came back to teaching mainly online at a Berkeley City College in Berkeley, California, where I teach statistics in an online class, it's a great place because I have a wide diversity of students. And I also write research papers, and I've written a book recently called The Story of Chance. Here it is. What's Luck Got to Do with It? That just came out about a month ago. It sums up a lot of the things that I do.
Absolutely. And I'm sure we'll touch on a lot of the topics you covered in the book throughout this episode as well. And being that your expertise is the story of chance, I would love to start there and jump into, for our listeners. And before we hit record, we discussed a lot about, for me, my circle, my friends, they're very much in the apps when it comes to sports betting. Just got back from a great weekend with some good friends from my buddy's bachelor party. We went to the casino. We ended up having a blackjack table, had a great time and enjoyed it. Some of us made money, some of us lost money, but spirits were high leaving. None of us lost the mortgage. That's the good news, right? But when it comes to these situations, whether it be sports betting, going to the casino, or even just gambling on horse races, it is an activity a lot of friends of mine and peers and men tend to gravitate towards. Let's first understand what it is we're tapping into when it comes to the fundamental principles of chance and probability. How do they apply to these games that we play when we're putting all of it on black, or we're doubling down on a 10-7, right? What are we really participating in when we talk about the fundamental principles of chance and probability?
Well, sort of the basic idea is that we're having, when we do this, all the gambling games are sort of a metaphor for randomness, and randomness permeates our existence. And the games that we play, the ones that you were talking about, can be actually categorized into different types of games. So let's start with the easy ones, the casino games, like craps, that's dice. And I have, you can roll a pair of dice and you make bets on it, on what happens, on the outcomes, or roulette. You talked about putting all your money on black. You're playing roulette. So that's another very popular casino game. So let's just look at those two games for a second. They're both games of pure chance. You cannot have winning strategies because you're doing the same thing over and over and over. And not only that, making the same bets over and over are independent of each other. Namely, I can't learn something from the previous roll of the dice or the previous spin of the roulette wheel. Now, in rare circumstances, I might be able to learn something if there's something wrong with the equipment. If somebody brings loaded dice in the casino, which is very rare these days, because casinos have better security than airports. And the same goes for roulette wheels. If there's a roulette wheel that's not evenly balanced, people made a lot of money off such roulette wheels in Europe back in the 1970s, but that's not happening anymore. It's certainly not going to happen in this country, where lots of money is spent on maintaining the equipment. But given that, just talking about the games themselves, they're games of pure chance. You can't have a strategy. If someone tells you they have a roulette system or a crap system, then you have to be a little bit careful, because they're going to win some and lose some, and they'll wind up losing more in the long run than they win. It's simply not possible. It can be mathematically shown that you cannot have a winning system in either of those two games. Now, all is not lost. You can get lucky. I can go and make a bet. And then what you said earlier, of course, is very important. You should never bet more than you can afford to lose. And that's gotten a lot of very smart people in trouble when they did that. For instance, there's a smart fellow who was called the Crypto King, Sam Bankman-Fried, who is now sitting in prison in New York. And that's because he bet more than he can afford to lose. And I'll go into that story later. But for now, let's just talk about craps, roulette, and other casino games. So craps and roulette are fun. They're exciting. You can get lucky and win. But if you keep doing it over and over, any strategy will eventually fail you. So that's so let's move on to another game right next to those games in the casino, blackjack, which is a very popular game. And blackjack's different from craps and roulette because it has what are called conditional probabilities, which people in my areas have studied a lot. Conditional probabilities are simple to understand. If I'm dealing cards out of a deck, if I see an ace come out, then I know the chance of an ace in the rest of the cards is lower. That's called a conditional probability. If I roll a pair of dice and get a 7, then the chance of getting a 7 doesn't change for the next roll. It always stays the same. In fact, there's something called the gambler's fallacy. The gambler's fallacy says, to use craps as an example, if you see a bunch of 7s if you see a bunch, let's use roulette. You see a bunch of reds in a row in roulette, then because of the law of averages, which says things average out, then black is more likely. But that's not true. That's called a fallacy. It's always the same, and that's why the games of roulette and craps are always are games of pure chance. But blackjack, on the other hand, has these conditional probabilities, so you can learn as a hand is being dealt about the cards. And you, the player, has to have a different strategy, or you don't have to, but you have many more options than the dealer, who has to do certain things. And so way back in the late 1950s, computer scientists at IBM wrote simulation programs to show that blackjack can have winning strategies because of those couple of things. Number one, the conditional probabilities you can learn as the cards come out of the deck. And number two, you have many more options than the dealer on when you stand and when you hit. So in the early 1960s, a guy named Ed Thorpe, who was a professor of math at UC Irvine, wrote a book called Beat the Dealer. And he gave these blackjack strategies. They're not easy. You have to be good at memorizing not every card, but just types of cards in a crowd in a casino. If you can do that, if you can focus like that, then you can have a strategy that gives you a slight advantage over the casino. And when that happened, the casinos went crazy. They never had such a thing before. They assumed blackjack was like craps and roulette. It's too complicated to have a strategy, but computer simulations changed all that. So they changed the rules to some extent. So now if you go into a casino to play blackjack, there are these automatic shufflers, and they shuffle after every hand. Not all the games. If you find a game where they deal throughout the deck, then that's how it was back when Beat the Dealer was written. And then that's where you can apply one of these strategies. But you still have something called a basic strategy, which gives you almost an even game with the casino. So blackjack is actually in a different category as craps and roulette.
Oh, I love
Another
that.
game that's a popular casino game is poker. And in poker, it's a different thing. Poker, you're playing against the other players, not against the casino. So poker has certain skills and strategies. The casino doesn't care because you're just paying an entry fee or whatever to play against the other players.
How do these strategies or thought processes apply not just in the casino arena, but when it comes to sports betting? I imagine that introduces a whole layer, if not multiple layers, of variables.
Well, right. So that's a very good question, Ted, because sports betting, and one of the reasons it's popular it's popular with people who like to think about things and people who like sports, of course, and who like to do research and keep track of things. And sports betting is not, it's the same in some respects, but in many respects, it's different slightly from a casino game because things change. It's not like rolling the pair of dice over and over again. The teams change, the coaches change, there are injuries, weather, all kinds of factors that go in to determining the outcome of a sporting event. And in the most popular games like football, for example, NFL football season is well underway now. And they have something called the point spread system, which is supposed to equalize the teams in a game. The point spread system is just a handicap given to the presumed inferior team. So that's supposed to make each game a 50-50 proposition, like a coin toss. That's what the point spread is supposed to do. But it doesn't mean that it does that because the point spread is determined by how much money is bet on each team. And as long as the point spread is set so that the betting amount is equalized, if each team, let's say, gets $10,000 bet on it, the sports book or the casino, whoever's running the game, doesn't care what happens because the losers pay off the winners and the casino keeps 10%, which is commonly known as the vigorish.
Well, if I
So,
can interrupt, not to
yeah, go
interrupt
ahead.
really
Sorry.
quick, but when
Yeah.
you mention that the point spread is based on the money being bet on the teams, in essence, an inferior team could have more money bet for it, and the spread could be in favor of the inferior team, and it can almost be reversed. Some would imagine. Is that correct?
Well, so that's a really good question. And if whether it's the inferior team or the good team, if a lopsided amount of money gets bet on one of the two teams, then the sports books, that is the casino, will modify the point spread. So if the favorite if one team is a 5-point favorite and everybody starts betting on that team, then they'll make them a 6-point or a 7-point favorite. So you get worse odds to get money bet on the underdog. So the point spread is not a static thing; it's dynamic, and it doesn't. So the way things work, there are people in the odds maker's office, or the people who are running the game, who keep careful track of things. So they sort of know where to start. You have to start with something before any money gets bet. And then over the course of the week in football, things change, not by a lot, but by a little, just to keep that balance in place. Now, it's not exactly balanced. It's impossible to do that. But the sports books try to keep it close to the money. When I'm talking about balance, I mean, not the number of people who bet on each team, but the amount of money that's bet on each team. And so there can be discrepancies in that. And it's some people who bet on sports try to look at that and see if they can get what they call good odds or favorable odds, and others look at other things. So I did a bunch of consulting. I have a friend who was the head odds maker in Las Vegas. His name was Roxy Roxborough. He's retired now, and he had a team of people, an expert in each sport. And he's the one who was credited with computerizing everything. So now everything is kept online, and they're very sophisticated in how they manage the point spreads. But I've done some analysis for clients who I consult for in that world, and there are players who are skilled. So I don't want to keep rambling on here, but the big issue with people who sort of regulate these things is whether the game is a game of that. But in this case, the game, I don't mean the actual game. I mean betting on it is a game of chance or a game of skill. And it turns out there really are skilled sports bettors, people who do better than luck would allow.
Oh. This is actually the perfect segue into the following question that I had here, Dr. Orkin, was when it comes to sports betting in particularly, or even whether it be the other traditional games we mentioned at the casino, there's a lot of talk of that gut feeling or the strategy, right? And the question simply comes down to luck or probabilities and statistics versus that gut feeling and that strategy. When it comes to those games with the probabilistic, I believe the term you mentioned was the probabilistic or the conditional probabilities. In a game that has those conditional probabilities, whether it be blackjack or the multiple variables that could be impacting the outcome of a football game when it comes to sports betting, uh, how much does the strategy or the gut feeling impact the outcome? Is it able to overcome some of the statistical mathematical outcomes, or are we still just playing an uphill battle?
Well, in a game like blackjack, it's much easier to analyze because blackjack, you're still doing this, even though there are these conditional probabilities that I mentioned. You're doing the same thing over and over, and that's why computer simulations allowed mathematicians to develop a strategy for a game that was a casino game. So there weren't things like the weather affecting it, but in a very complicated situation because of all the different things you can do. And so with blackjack strategies, it's really not. I don't think gut feeling enters into it. I mean, people can say, "Oh, I had a feeling that ace was going to come my way," but I don't really believe in that for blackjack. Now, in sports betting, it's a whole sort of. I'm not going to say your gut feeling is no good, because what is a gut feeling? Well, a gut feeling is based partially on your just sort of intuitive feeling about something. And if if you study sports and study football, for example, then your gut feeling incorporates all the knowledge you have. So it's not really a gut feeling is not something in some area, like in sports betting, is not just some magic thing. It encompasses all the knowledge that you've gained by studying and maybe playing in this sport. And so I would not be one to say that there's no such thing as a helpful gut feeling in when you're wagering on a sporting event, because if you're an expert, you may not be a math person, you may not be keeping everything on a spreadsheet, but you could still have great knowledge of the teams and be a wise sports bettor as a result. So, I mean, I know one person, I know a couple people in Las Vegas who used to be quite successful in sports betting because they were very knowledgeable. And so they were not math people. They kept,
Mhm.
they just sort of accumulated all this information and kept it in their minds and memories. Um, and so they did have gut feelings, but if you really try to pin them down, that gut feeling was based on a wealth of information that they've accumulated by studying this over time.
Yeah, almost something
But if
obscure
you
like,
ask
"Hey,
me
the
about
last
does
5
someone have a
times they
gut
played."
feeling, what's that?
I
Sorry,
was
I didn't
I was
hear.
gonna say it's like a gut feeling where, like, the last 5 times they played in 30-degree weather, they lost or something obscure that they don't that most people wouldn't pick up on or whatnot that just seems to be a tidbit they remember.
Right, that's right. And so that's a perfect example because, in fact, the math people do keep track of that on a spreadsheet. And you
Mm,
can now that the internet is so um, pervasive everywhere, you can get that kind of information. But in the quote old days, and even continuing till today, there are people who just keep track of this information because they love to study the sport. And their gut feeling is different than my gut feeling about who's going to win the game because they have so much more knowledge. And
mm.
but if you ask me about a gut feeling when you're playing a game of dice, I would say no, there is no such thing.
Yeah, purely mathematical with the dice.
Yeah.
I want to touch on something you mentioned, just to help the listeners understand. You mentioned when it came to sports betting, the importance of it being an actual skill, and there are better sports bettors than others. Why was that so important to differentiate the in the influence of skill as opposed to simple chance?
Well, that's really a great question, Ted, because um, the answer to that question is because the lawyers wanted that or the regulators. And somehow, back uh, the in the development of these rules, is the idea. Well, for sports betting, let's just talk about sports betting. That um, if you sports betting, many people have criticized over the years have criticized sports betting by saying that it messes up the integrity of the game. And there have been cases where games uh, were not done properly and people were cheating just to try to make money on betting. And then the most well-known story is the sad story of Pete Rose, who was one of the baseball greats. And if he had just not gone into coaching, he would have been in the Hall of Fame, and nobody would have cared about the fact that he was betting on the teams that he was coaching or the manager of. But somehow, out of all that, came this notion that if you want to bet on a game that has maybe a little bit of chance in it, it has to be skill based. And um, as far as I'm concerned, that does uh, do one thing. It sort of gets rid of the games of pure chance, like craps, and lets you focus on games that may have some skill. Now, people have taken games of chance. Um, an example is bingo. Now,
Mm,
bingo is obviously a game of chance because you get a card at sort of at random with random numbers on it, and the bingo caller calls out a name, the number, and whoever gets a straight line on their card is the winner. But now developers of games have decided to get around that by giving everybody the same card, so there's no chance, no probability in what card you got, and then the winner is the person who can fill out the numbers the quickest. So it's all a hand-eye coordination game. And they're doing that just to satisfy the regulators. It sounds kind of silly, but there are such games out there now just to be able to have them be for wagering. And um, So this whole thing of chance versus skill is just embedded into state laws. And in fact, there's even a term that was originally written by lawyers that says the game cannot have a material degree of chance. That's a standard term that everybody uses. The banks, the regulators, the app store. The game cannot have. So if you ask me, the mathematician, what does that mean? I would have a hard time answering. It just means you have to get as much chance out of it as you can. That term was written by lawyers and regulators. And so this setup, I mean, I can sort of see the logic behind it, but it's a lot of it's sort of arbitrary. In fact, I'll tell you just a quick. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask a quick thought to that. When you take out the existence of pure chance and you add the skill aspect of it, I can understand, as you mentioned, I can understand the thought process behind regulators on that. However, do you inadvertently disadvantage a group of people in that game? For example, if I'm not a sports watcher, I don't have the same chance of doing well in sports betting as a friend of mine who's an avid NFL watcher. But if we both were to walk up to the craps table, we have the same chance of winning, or at the roulette table, we have the same chance of winning, regardless of our background. So, though I can understand the thought process from regulators and the lawmakers, to your expertise, do you think that would ostracize a certain group of people or decrease their chance of winning?
Well, I understand what you're saying. Now, of course, it's true. You can go into a casino and play games of chance. It's only we're only talking when I talk about chance versus skill. I'm talking about online betting activities. Now, one
Correct.
of the other things one of the nice things about betting on sports online is that nobody can cheat on who won the game. You know who won the game. It's public information. Now, a few years ago, there was online poker was all over the place. And you can argue that poker is a game of skill. But if you're playing online, you can have, and this is what happened, bots, namely automated other players. So you might be playing against a team of bots all run by the same person or by the management. It's easy to cheat. It's easy to cheat in a game like that. It's also easy to cheat in a game like in an online game like craps or roulette, because how do you tell how the dice really came up? They could the management the online gaming company could be using trick dice. Who knows? But if you have a game that can be verified, that's somehow tied into this idea of luck versus skill, even though it's not precisely tied in. But it's kind of interesting. But for some reason, nowadays, to have one of these online games, you have to demonstrate that it's a game of skill in some way.
Yeah.
Whether it be sports or whether it be other things like the new versions of bingo that you see online.
If iron sharpens iron, so does one man sharpen another. But if you're a man and you're alone or listening to this, then who sharpens you? What's going on, guys? Ted Phaeton here, host of the Modern Man Podcast, also founder of the Noble Knights Mastermind Group. And I'm just out here encouraging you to find your circle. Maybe you're on a personal growth journey and nobody around you understands the new mentality that you're possessing. That's okay. You can find an online community that will pour into you, will navigate your goals and navigate your obstacles, share their experiences, resources, and more. Join the Noble Knights Mastermind Group and try us out for free to tap into a community of men helping each other scale up and reach their goals.
Check out themodernmanpodcast.com.
What are the what is it about chance that's so intoxicating and addicting, right? We could touch on the dangers really quick of sports betting and things like that, but why is it so captivating and addictive to people?
Well, there are various reasons, but general, one of the things which I said at the beginning is that chance, playing a gambling game, is sort of a metaphor for your daily life, in which you run into everyone's life is determined by some random things, and luck, and skill, So you can be skillful and get ahead, and you can have bad luck and suddenly you're in trouble or whatever. So a gambling game is sort of a concentrated version of that. Now, psychologists will also say that there's this notion of intermittent reward. That is, sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, and somehow that hooks people. Whether you're playing a game of skill or a game of chance, it's the whole idea of intermittent reward, which means even if you're a skilled blackjack player, you're still going to lose sometimes and you're going to win sometimes. It's just the slight little balance of winning more than you lose that determines the game of skill. I mean, a skilled blackjack player will have to play for many hours to make a reasonable profit and have to make reasonably large bets. And if you saw the movie 21, which talked about one version of playing blackjack with a team of players, you'll see it's not so simple. It's a rather complicated activity. So even a game of skill, even a game which involves skill like blackjack, if you're a good blackjack player, takes a lot of work. And people do it so people will play partially because of this intermittent reward idea, which has been proved by psychologists to be, for instance, rats, what they always start out with. The psychologists always start out with rats in a maze. That's what they use. But the rats are much more go crazy when they have intermittent rewards. They like the food coming out of a food dispenser. If the rat can just get the food whenever it wants, okay, that's one thing. Of course, they have to eat to survive. But if they get food a third of the time that they try, they go crazy. And so that's effect. So that's one of the reasons that people like to play gambling games. Another reason, of course, for some people, people like to have the opportunity to suddenly get a bunch of reward. And people who don't have the means will play the lottery. And so people like to say the lottery is a taxation on people who are not wealthy. And people who have more money will invest in the stock market or nowadays go online and play and bet on sports or something like that. But it's all the same idea of seeing how it's trying to defeat randomness. Is another little angle there. Randomness is constantly affecting you. There's nothing you can do about it. Randomness is just part of your life. And gambling gives you an opportunity to try to beat randomness. And of course, some people wind up not beating randomness and losing a lot.
Yeah. Or try to be on randomness's good graces, right? And
right,
good
exactly.
side of that coin.
Right, yes. That's a really good point. So psychologically also, if you go to the casino and win, you feel good about yourself and you feel like, randomness is on your side. So that's a good point. That's another reason that people like to do that.
Yeah, I often hear people say if they're having like a good luck streak, they're like, "Hey, you gonna play the lottery, or you should go to the casino? Like, keep think randomness is in your favor. Keep it going."
Right, exactly. That's exactly right. And
how and I would love to extract some of the value and the insights you share in your book, the story of chance. How could we maybe reshape our understanding of the role in chance and statistics and in our everyday lives, whether it be from sports betting, going to the casino, or walking out the door and going about our day?
right. Well, I have so I actually spend a bunch of time in the book. I'll hold it up again. Plug. Talking about casino games, blackjack, and then luck versus skill or chance versus skill. And so I go into in somewhat detail about betting in craps, betting in roulette, different strategies like some people call the double up strategy, some people call it the double down strategy, but where you bet, and if you lose, you double your bet. And if you lose that time, you double your bet again, with the idea being eventually you win and cover all your losses. And so I talk about that, and I talk about things related to that. And I also And so I go into that in some detail so you can actually see how to compute. There's something called, let me give one example. There's something called expected value. It's a mathematical term. An expected value is how well you do on the average if you're betting over and over on the same or similar things. So you can mathematically compute that. And in craps, if you bet on 7 over and over again, I go into this in the book, you will, every time you roll a pair of dice, the chance of 7 coming up is 1/6, because there's 6 ways out of 36 to get a 7. And if you bet on 7 and win, the payoff odds are 4-1. So you get $4 for every dollar bet if you bet on 7 and win. So so the question is, so you might be lucky and win, you might be unlucky and lose. But if you do it over and over again, the law of averages says that your expected value, which I talk about in the book, is going to be, well, you win $4 1/6 of the time and lose $1 5/6 of the time. So you just average that and you get minus 1/6. So you lose 17 cents per dollar bet. And that's a mathematical fact. You can't get around that if you bet on 7 in craps. Now in roulette, it's similar. It's not that same number, but you compute the EV, or expected value, and that's how you can tell what's going to happen if you're doing the same thing over and over again. But now if you sort of go out into the real world, so to speak, and you can still compute expected value, but it's a little fuzzier because you don't have the same clear rules. Like buying and selling crypto, Bitcoin, or whatever you want to call it, is also a gambling game, and it's also based on chance. But it's not like rolling a pair of dice, because you're not sure what's going to happen. And, the crypto market may suddenly go up, or you see what's happened. It suddenly goes up, suddenly goes down. People say it's sort of rigged. It's like a Ponzi scheme, when there's some truth to that. But the guy, for example, and I have a chapter on this in the book, Sam Bankman-Fried, the guy who was called the Crypto King for a while, had his own crypto exchange. It's like a website where you can buy and sell different types of crypto coins. And that's not like betting on craps. It's much more complicated. But he was an MIT educated guy, very, very smart in math and physics. And he used EV, expected value, to figure out his bets. But he made a big mistake. And so I go into this in the book. I could be the world's greatest blackjack player, but there's only going to, even in the best of terms, there's only going to be about a 52% chance I'll win a hand. And so I can't bet my entire bankroll each time I make play a blackjack hand, because I'll go broke quickly and I won't have time to take advantage of the fact that I have a positive expected value. That's very simple. And you have to have money management that goes along with your betting. But so anyway, to get to the crypto story, which is a chapter in the book, Sam Bankman-Fried started betting more and more and more, and he knew about positive expected value, but he didn't apply money management. And so he suddenly started sliding down that slippery slope of someone who playing a game that they don't use proper money management for, even if it's a game where they could win in the long run. And he started borrowing from his investors, which of course is a no-no, because he didn't tell them that's what he was doing. And he wound up in deep trouble. But so I talk about that in the book, about not only do you have to have a good idea about what the odds are, you have to be able to manage your money. So that's one of the topics in the book, and that goes along with the chapter on luck versus skill. Now,
for the men who are listening, and just to kind of continue extracting on your point there, coming up towards the end of our interview, applying this for the men listening who enjoy sports betting, enjoy going to the casino, because it's an enjoyable time and it is a fun time. What advice would you give them to ensure that they maintain control and responsibility through the process of taking part in the game of chance and skill?
Well, there are a couple of basic rules. One is if you're going to, and so that's a great question. One of the basic rules is if you're going to play games of pure chance like craps, roulette, buy lottery tickets, didn't talk about that, but there's 2 chapters on that in the book, then you should only do it for fun. Don't think you're going to make money in the long run, because you won't. So you should just separate those those types of games from the idea of doing it to make money. Sports betting, on the other hand, people who, if you study the odds and there are lots of important factors, and if you can isolate them better than the betting public, then you'll have an edge because you'll know which side to bet on, and the point spread might be wrong. And that's what professional sports bettors do. But the professional sports bettors know very well that even if they have an edge, they shouldn't bet all their money. They just bet a fraction of their money on hand each week because, there's some luck involved and they're not going to win every time. So, and I'll give you a quick example. A number of years ago, there was Oregon had a lottery, a football lottery, not a regular lottery like Mega Millions or Powerball. And so that was their only type of sports betting. You had to go buy, it's like a parlay card, but anyway, you bet on a team in this lottery. It wasn't like you had to fill out a number of different bets. But anyway, without going into the details, whenever the 49ers were big favorites, because in those days, that was the closest home team, the closest good team. So everybody bet on the 49ers. And so by everybody, I mean more than who should have. And so the point spread, they had point spreads on this card, would go way out, over the roof for the 49ers. But the people thought, this friend of mine who was the odds maker at the time, they'd sit in his office and the guys in the office would buy parlays on the other side because it was so ridiculous, because everybody was betting on the Niners because they were so popular. So anyway, that's an extreme example of, if you're going to, and I've analyzed this for clients who are developing different types of betting pools, et cetera, to go online. If you study, there are people who do better than luck in sports betting. And generally, they know about money management too, not to bet more than they should. But so that is an opportunity of skill being present and allowing for skilled players. And I talk about that too. Let's see, what else? So I think I cover the idea of sports betting and stuff. But anyway, go ahead. See, do you have any more questions?
Well, you touched on it briefly. I want to make sure that I give us an opportunity to touch on parlays and really adding and stacking these bets up, because it's also very popular with these apps these days as folks are looking for that payout, right? Trying to leverage the skill and their confidence in a string of bets. Explain to me what happens when you introduce the parlays into it in terms of your chance and how more variables come into play.
Well, yeah. So in a parlay bet, you're betting on the outcome of more than one game. So we're talking about sports betting. I mean, there are all kinds of different parlays, but so you might be betting on 2 games. You might be betting one game on the over/under, another game on the points, but you have to win all the different parts of the bet in order to win your bet. So the payoff, the odds get a lot higher. So people like to do that because the odds are higher. So if you just bet on 2 games instead of 1, the payoff odds go up, because the chance is, if the point spread is correct, and the chance is a half that 50-50 that you win, it's a half times a half, or 1/4, or 3-1 that you'll win both bets and win a 2-game parlay. And so it's interesting and fun because the odds are higher. And the casinos don't like to pay a lot, so they won't give you the true odds. They'll pay for a 2-game parlay. It's 13-5, $13 for every $5 bet. But if you're skilled, there are people who are skilled who like making parlay bets, as you said, because one of the reasons is the payoff odds are higher, and the other is if you find discrepancies and let's say more than one game, you want to bet. If you bet on all of them at once and you win every single one of them, then you win a lot more money. Now, that's a case though where you have to be even more careful about how much you bet, because if you bet it like a four-way parlay, you're betting on four different events, and if even one of them is wrong, you lose the entire bet. So you have to be careful how much you bet, so that you're not going to. Even if you're skilled, even the skilled player has to know that if you lose one of those bets, you don't want to go broke. You have to bet a fraction of your bankroll.
Yeah, that is so.
As an example, I had a client a number of years ago. It was a guy who ran this is before online gaming was so popular. He had an offshore sports book. So that's how they got around online sports betting back in the earlier days. They just had moved the sports book offshore, but you could still get in trouble with the banks. But anyway, he owned a sports book in Costa Rica where sports betting was perfectly legal. And he had a client who was also a con man himself and who was betting huge amounts on parlay bets, nothing but parlay bets in baseball, in hockey, in football, and he was making like 10-team parlay bets at a huge amount. He was betting like $10,000 for each bet, so like $200,000 a day. And no other sports books would take this guy because they knew what was going to happen to him. He was going to crash and burn. But this guy, who I knew, I didn't know him. I knew his lawyer. I got involved later. This one guy who liked to take these crazy people on as clients accepted this guy's bets. So this guy, in the course of a year and a half, lost $50 million and betting every single day on nothing but parlay bets. And where did he get all this money? Well, he swindled people in various other ways, not having to do with sports. So it was all basically stolen money, and he eventually got caught, went to prison, and the people he swindled had a team of lawyers. Were not poor people. They hired a team of lawyers to try to get the money back. And so the team of lawyers couldn't get the money back from this guy because he was in prison, didn't have any money. He lost it all betting with this guy at this offshore sports book. So they went after the guy at the offshore sports book. So this team of lawyers went after him, and that's how I got involved, because the lawyers said that it was impossible, mathematically impossible, to lose $50 million, a little bit less than that, but roughly that, in a year and a half of betting on parlays. And so they hired me to prove that, yes, it was possible to lose that much money. So that was my job.
I could just see the conversation, the memorandum you send over. Is this guy really that irresponsible?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, he
right.
is.
It's like, it takes a little bit of work, but you can do it. You can lose that much
Yeah.
money. And so that sort of fell flat. I proved that he could lose that much money. So then these lawyers said, well, in that case, he was cheating. The guy who ran the sports book was cheating. He was in collusion with this guy. He didn't really lose the $50 million, even though it was possible. They were now admitting that. It was because they were working together so that he could keep the money when he finally got caught. But anyway, it was a messy situation. But I convinced this team of lawyers that, yes, it was possible to lose $50 million betting parlay bets like that.
I'm sure that was a surprise, not just for our audience, but for the lawyers to realize as well.
Right.
Dr. Orkin, we're coming up on our time here. I want to make sure that folks have a chance to get your book, The Story of Chance, and also connect with you, follow you. What are some of the best links folks can reach out through?
Okay, so the book is The Story of Chance. What's luck got to do with it? And I touch today in our conversation, I touched on some of the topics in the book. There are a bunch of other topics too. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Barnes & Noble, on either of the websites, the online book places. And I'm on LinkedIn, Mike Orkin. You can reach me on LinkedIn and send me a message. And in fact, for example, if you're interested in the mathematical side of things, I wrote a couple of research papers that are not in the book, but that I'm happy to send you a PDF file if you like that sort of thing. One on chance versus skill in parlay bets, what we were just talking about. And another one I wrote that I published, it's not in the book, last year, is about when should the coach in an NFL game throw the red flag and the red challenge flag. And I go into a bunch of things. I compare throwing the red flag to a game of craps using loaded dice. And it turns out that there's some coaches who are pretty good at this, like Andy Reid of Kansas City. And there are some coaches who are great coaches but are terrible at that and don't want to deal with it, like Kyle Shanahan of the Niners. But anyway, I published this research. If you're interested, it's in a math journal called Significance, but I'll send you a PDF if you want to hook up on LinkedIn. You can send me a message.
Awesome. And I'll have those links in the show notes and in the description below for
Okay,
folks to get right through it, and
great.
they can connect with you, Dr. Orkin. But last question, and I save it for last. And honestly, it doesn't have anything to do with statistics, probability, or gambling, but it's just more of a personal question in terms of what is
Yeah.
something you've seen or something that's happened to you that shapes the way you view the world as a man.
Okay, that's a great question. Well, let's see. Let's go back to when I went to college. So I went to UC Berkeley. I grew up on the East Coast. I was interested in two things: sports and math. And when I was in high school, and also drinking beer at the time, but we won't go into that. But so I decided to come to Berkeley because I was involved in the usual sports when I was in high school. But when I came to college, the sport that I was most interested in was judo, and I was pretty good at it. I was on the Cal judo team, and then bad luck came my way because I blew out my knee when I was a junior, and so that had an impact on me. So I focused more. I could still do stuff, but not on a super competitive level. So I went more heavily into math, and I realized that probability. So then the math course that inspired me the most was probability, because at that time, I was a senior, I was realizing that randomness was messing with me in some ways. And so I wanted to learn more about it. And I did very well. And then when I went to graduate school, then that was sort of what got me started, realizing that people are affected by luck and randomness and also skill, some areas, and that's what I wanted to learn more
I love it. I love it. And so thankful you went that route because we were able to get a lot of
about.
value from you today. So it has
Well,
been an
thank you.
absolute pleasure having you on the show,
Yeah.
distinguished professor, consultant, researcher, and author with a wealth of experience that offers unique insights when it comes to probability and chance. Dr. Michael Orkin, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Well, thank you, Ted. It's been my pleasure. I really enjoyed being on your show.
Likewise. And I'm going to quickly recap some of the gems you left along the way. I know a lot of what we spoke about covered sports betting and gambling, but gambling is a metaphor for randomness, which could also be a metaphor for life. Casinos have better security than airports. Just a really fun tidbit that you mentioned early on, I thought
Yeah,
was fantastic. And then never bet more than you could afford to lose. That is key, fellas. If you enjoy
right,
sports betting, if you enjoy going to the casino, nothing wrong with that, but you don't want to come back home and have to have that conversation with your wife. It could be bad for everybody.
right, right.
Craps and roulette, any strategy involved, if they tell you there's a strategy, probably not. Craps and roulette, pure chance. But when you talk blackjack, you have conditional probabilities. The gambler's fallacy: if you think you've seen a bunch of reds and the next one's going to be black, your probabilities are still the same no matter what you saw as evidence prior to it. Every roll of the dice is unique at the craps table, and every roll of the roulette wheel in itself is unique as well. Blackjack can have a winning strategy. However, when you understand, from my comprehension of it, is expected value, it might just be a small tip in your direction, and you still have to apply money management, as well as understanding the odds when it comes to sports betting or these games that include skill along with the chance. And also, the tips that was shared was only do it for fun when it comes to the games of chance. When it comes to sports betting and things like that, make sure that you are paying attention to the money management aspect. And if you're looking to understand more around the nuances of chance, I encourage you to reach out and get Dr. Michael Orkin's book, The Story of Chance. Guys, thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of the episode. If you liked it, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, give us a follow, and leave us a rating to let us know how we're doing. And if you have a friend that you know can get value from this, maybe they're betting a little bit too much, maybe you want to have them get a better understanding of the world that they're in through this episode, and that would mean the world to us as well for you to share it. But as I always say at the end of the episode, guys, thank you so much. And everybody wants the sunshine, but they don't want the rain. But you can't get the pleasure without first the pain. Let's grow.